my consulting business, as I mentioned, I call myself a dispute resolution strategist and advisor. And I'm not exaggerating. Every single dispute I'm involved in right now has delays associated with buried utilities. Every one. Now, they're not the only delay, but they exist in every single one that I'm involved with. It's a common thread.
Welcome to Convos with Chris, inside the minds of infrastructure experts, where I dive deep with industry leaders redefining how we plan, design, build, and deliver future-proof infrastructure through AI and innovation. I'm your host, Chris Garafola, Head of Content at 4M. Chris here, Head of Content at 4M, where your utility research and project planning begins. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Len Vetrone, founder of Optimal Tiebreak Solutions. Len just came on board as one of our new advisors here at 4M. With over 30 years of experience, Len brings expertise in civil market strategy and business development. His leadership roles have included SVP at WebCore, COO at Skanska, and VP at Walsh Group. Len, thank you so much for joining me today for this discussion.
Appreciate it, Chris.
Just to kick things off here, why don't you tell everybody tuning in right now a little bit more about yourself, where you're calling in from, a little bit about your career journey that got you to where you are today.
All right, great. So I'm of Italian descent like you, Chris, and Italian-American. And I'm calling in from the desert here in 𝘐𝑯𝘳𝘓, California, which is a beautiful little spot, oasis in the West. I like to tell people I'm the classic go west young man. I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, and son of a mechanical engineer, Penn State guy. We moved to Illinois when I was in high school, and I ended up going to Bradley University, and I'm a civil engineer by degree. Started my career in construction in Chicago with the Walsh Group, and the Walsh Group, as you know, are every year they're one of the top infrastructure contractors in the United States, and actually even in North America. So I had great experience with Walsh, and in fact, the first project I was on with Walsh, I like to say I was just blessed with. We built a cloverleaf interchange in Gary, Indiana, and literally on that project, I experienced almost every aspect of infrastructure work. We built bridges, we built precast bridges, railroad steel bridges, we built concrete cast in place, and Walsh is your kind of, I would say, preeminent self-perform work, builders. So we literally self-performed everything but the asphalt paving and the electrical and the striping on the pavement. So that's kind of what got me into infrastructure work, and then Walsh in the late 80s was on a large organic growth expansion plan. Excuse me, and they sent me out to California to start their West Coast operations, and so I came to California in 1986 and candidly never left. And
was the weather just too good to leave?
Weather and the opportunities are just fabulous, and from California, just like the East Coast, New York, etc. You end up having clients and opportunities to work all over the world, and so. I have a couple of children and a wife that I've been married to for 43 years, and
Wow, congrats. I'm
Yeah, and we love it out here.
on year 4, so I got some work to do, but
There you
slowly.
go. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And then I retired from Skanska. It's about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago, and I wasn't ready to be done in the industry, and so I got into the consulting side. And one of the things that I was served on a couple of nonprofits while I was in leadership roles at WebCore and Walsh and Skanska. And one was the Center for Innovation in the Construction Industry, which is based out of San Francisco. And so through that experience, I got introduced to several startups in the built environment. And so through that, I really acquired a passion for more innovation in our industry. And I've been in the industry, your kind saying over 30 years, it's been 45 years. And so, you know, I've seen a lot of change in our industry.
What is some of the biggest change that you've seen over the 45 years in the industry, and what's the of those changes, what surprised you the most?
So I think you know, obviously the advent of innovation through into our industry, you know, we're kind of, I would say, in our industry, we're late to the game compared to, you know, a number of other industries. And part of that, I think, Chris, is that the barrier to entry in our industry is so low. You know, to be a contractor, you know, you depends on the state. You just go pass a test and you get a contractor's license and you're in business. And so as a result, we're very diverse. We're very scattered in our industry. So I think tech companies, it's more difficult to make a splash because of that. Because, you know, you have contractors that'll work on people's houses to contractors that, you know, for example, I've worked for that are building, you know, landmark infrastructure projects that are in the billions, right? So,
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing that I think that I've seen is that we now, and Forum is a classic example of it, is, you know, we now have technology through databases and now with AI that can bring metrics and data, you know, to our fingertips that before we didn't have. And, you know, we used to have green engineering paper that we'd use to write down quantities and do designs on and try to plan our scheduling. And so I think the big change, we still build most projects with humans, right? We have some equipment, and robotics is starting to come in, but it still isn't widely used. I mean, the majority of what we build is either people operating machines or people doing the work with, you know, with tools, right? So, but what is different is having this information at your ready fingertips for both planning and execution of the work that we didn't have. And so you can pre-plan and pre-engineer. And then I think the key is having that feedback loop of lessons learned that get from the field to the office. What's probably been the most frustrating thing over my career is just seeing seeing the same mistakes being made over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Because those lessons learned and that data doesn't get captured in a way that it now can be. But two, that feedback loop depended on, people communicating in a physical way to get that information. Now, through technology, we have
automated.
Exactly. And so now it's really getting it in, to me, that it's really getting it into the culture of companies in our industry for people to use the benefit of that automation and use it to its fullest extent.
Yeah, that's interesting, Len, because sometimes challenges keep occurring because there's not a solution for that challenge yet, and so that's why the challenges keep happening. Now the technology exists to solve some of those challenges, so it's more of an issue of just enabling, empowering, adapting, right? Versus keep doing what we've always done, because now there's actually a solution. Now it's just more about awareness and just getting the word out there that this solution exists. And that actually brings me back. I want to take a step back to how you even, why you even wanted to start working with 4M. You mentioned the challenges that the industry has traditionally had in terms of infrastructure development regarding utilities, and I would love to know a little bit more about, why did you decide to start advising 4M, being a part of our mission? Because you also mentioned there's a lot of construction tech companies out there. It's a saturated market. Why 4M specifically?
Good, thanks. Yeah, well, I was fortunate. I was introduced to your co-founder and CEO, 𝘐𝘯𝘧𝘬𝘓, a couple of years ago. And through a colleague in the industry, met him and introduced me to him. And after several virtual meetings with 𝘐𝘯𝘧𝘬𝘓 and him showing me the technology, and quite frankly, it was eye-opening to me. And I would say even more important is I just loved 𝘐𝘧𝘧𝘬𝘓's passion for the mission of what 4M is trying to solve, right? And so that combined with candidly having been in this business for 45 years, and and seeing and thinking how many projects that I've been involved with in my career that were negatively impacted by buried utilities. And as I grew in my role as a leader, I better understood, when I was younger, I understood the project impact because I was a project engineer, or I was a project manager, or I was a senior, whatever. I understood the impact of my project because it stopped the project, it delayed it, it cost extra money, but then as I moved up in more leadership roles in the companies I was involved in, I saw the impact it had on our company. And then as I started getting more involved in industry issues through nonprofits and other organizations, boards that I was on, I saw the industry impact that it had. And so I think, in answer to your question, I'm at that point in my career where when I heard about and I saw the solution, I saw the technology at work that 𝘐𝘯𝘧𝘬𝘓 demonstrated to me, I'm just like, this is game changing. This has the potential to be game changing. So, I want to help do that.
I love that. And I love how you brought me through that journey of a project perspective, a company perspective, an industry perspective, and then there's just the societal, the livelihoods of every American perspective, because another reason why I joined 4M is just doing something that's greater than myself because I'm a consumer of the infrastructure that's being built. So if I can help accelerate these timelines, reduce risk, I mean, the things that I want to consume, whether it's a highway that's going to help me get from A to B quicker and safer, like I want that to be done faster, right? From a selfish standpoint. And you mentioned, I know over your career, you probably have so many stories to tell in terms of how buried utilities have negatively impacted your projects. But I would love if you could share maybe one project in particular that buried utilities really derailed the project. And if you had access to reliable utility data earlier, it really would have changed the outcome of that project.
So, it's interesting. I would say it's difficult to pinpoint one because candidly, it happened on so many projects throughout my career and candidly in my consulting business now. I help clients with claim resolution but there was one I was thinking about I worked with one of my fellow board members, Mike Cabelli at Skanska, and I was on the board of Skanska Civil when Mike was the CEO. And we had a project in the Bay Area for BART and VTA, the Valley Transportation Association. And it was a complicated project. It was light rail through multiple communities. And it was a classic example of where there were massive delays to that project due to utilities and right-of-way issues with utilities and not having proper as-builts. And it created millions of dollars worth of, delays to that project that ended up having to be negotiated between the parties, and where it actually registered with me was because I was on the board of Skanska Civil and in an executive leadership position. Skanska is a publicly traded company on the Stockholm Exchange, and the impact of the write-downs that we had to make to that project, combined with a couple of other projects with similar delays due to utility issues, it affected Skanska's stock price on the market. So that, for me, that was one where talking about taking it from the project level all the way to, the analysts that were evaluating Skanska's, stock, there was a reaction to that level that the root cause was several projects that had unforeseen site condition and utility delays. So, and in answer to your second question, there's absolutely, and it's in my entire career, the benefit of having more accurate and more timely information with regard to buried utilities. It absolutely could have changed the outcome, significantly on those projects.
So would you, if we could go back in time, if 4M existed back on that day, do you think that if you were able to get instant access to reliable utility data with a solution like 4M at the very start of that project, it would have ameliorated some of those issues, and you wouldn't have been as derailed as it was?
I have no doubt in my mind. No, it's the key in my mind. It's what makes it's the secret sauce in my opinion for as you mentioned earlier, it's really increasing awareness of this software platform and
Right.
what it can bring to people in the pre-planning and planning stages. And you mentioned something earlier too, Chris, that I wanted to add on to, is the other thing that you realize, and I've seen through so many of these projects, is when a project is funded, as in most of these infrastructure projects are public funds, there's contingencies set aside, and there are experts that do estimates to help develop, the budgets and the funding for the capital improvements. Well, unfortunately, these utility issues in terms of either relocations or re-engineering or delays, they all happen at the beginning of the project. And what they end up doing is they oftentimes deplete fully or exceed the contingencies that are put in there for an entire project.
Wow.
So, the impact of that is that, and usually, projects are one part of an overall program that is funded. And the thing that I ended up beginning to realize as I grew in my role is that it's not just the impact to that project, but then it's the impact to that entire program, because the funds are raised, and oftentimes it's through public voting processes, etc. Bonds are written that fund these. Well, it's a finite amount of money, and so when you're spending millions of dollars on infrastructure issues that are not putting anything in place, when you're spending money on delays or relocating utilities or repairing utilities that wasn't anticipated in the original budgets, what ends up happening is you don't end up building the whole program that was originally intended to be funded. And
is there an example of that, like where that's happened, where like a program just kind of stalled out because all the contingency budget was used because
it happens all the time. It happens all the time where they lump a project off of a program, or they end up downsizing the last project in the program. Absolutely. Wow. It happens on a regular basis.
That's so sad. That's so sad. Obviously we're building this infrastructure for many reasons, and for that to be, especially now that I feel like something like a 4M solution can help free up some of that contingency budget to be used for, to your point, throughout the entirety of that project, instead of just the earliest stage where utilities seem to kind of eat up all of that budget. That's wild. I never even really thought of it like that.
That's why, Chris, I think it's going to be one of the best use case examples for project owners, for public agencies and owners, because that's what they look at. They have a finite amount of funds, and they have a plan to do X amount of infrastructure for those funds. And when they have to spend Y amount on unanticipated either differing site conditions or utility relocations, engineering, right away issues, it then takes away from what we call the bricks and the sticks of what you actually intended to build.
Right. Interesting. Len, I wanted to hit you with a stat that kind of riffs off of this point in terms of like cost overruns, project delays. I was reading a report from McKinsey and Company, and it said that communication failures from office planning and field execution are a critical factor in construction delays and cost overruns. So that gap between the office planning, collecting all the research, the utility data, to then equipping the field, there's just a disconnect there, and there's communication gaps. What do you think about that stat? More specifically, how did you better equip field teams in your experience to accelerate these project timelines and equip these field teams so they had the best data and resources available to get the job done?
You've heard me use this term, and in our business, it's plan to work and work to plan. So is a very simple way to look at construction. And so the more time you spend on planning the work, the more successful you are at working the plan.
Right.
And so in answer to your question about how do you help the field teams be more successful,
right,
it's one, involve the people that are going to build the project earlier in the project in the pre-planning stage. So when you do have that handoff, there's continuity of people. So I have found that the more that field people who are going to execute are involved in the pre-construction process and then the pre-planning of the work, you don't have that transfer lack of continuity, right? So that's one. Two, they also understand better what your goals are and how you develop your strategies and your plan to achieve those goals. So I'm a huge sports person. There's a lot of analogies to sports, right? You know, you go out and you play a football game, you're scouting, you have advanced scouts, you're coming up with a plan, you're focusing on that plan and you're practicing it that week. And then when you execute it on game day, it's the people who are executing it are developing the plan and fully understand why you have the plan. And then, you know, to continue that analogy, you have game day changes based on things that happen, and that's always going to happen in our business, right? But the more you pre-plan, and 4M is a tool in our industry that to me, the real advantage of this tool is up front, right?
Yeah.
Is you're getting information that people now can plan and design and engineer solutions based on that information and a more complete set of information than what is currently available.
Right. That makes sense. And to kind of keep riffing off the analogies and examples, I've heard to go slow to go fast. And I think traditionally, and correct me if I'm wrong, Len, but there's the reason why maybe sometimes people try to go fast in the early stages in planning is because projects just need to get done and delivered and started. There's just really aggressive timelines where maybe traditionally getting reliable utility data would take a little bit more time because it was all over the place. You had to call utility owners, you had to look through blueprints. It just was a manual process where going slow to go fast, really, we couldn't do that because again, like the timelines were so aggressive, where as a solution like with 4M, where maybe if we can accelerate that time to data, that speed to data, more projects would use 4M, right? Because it's not that they didn't want to maybe do more diligence and do more planning. It's maybe that they just didn't have the time to do it. Does that sound like that resonates, or is that directionally correct?
It does. And actually, to tie back to an earlier point we talked about, is that oftentimes the funding cycle, and it sometimes takes 10 years but by the time a project is initially conceived till it is funded. And oftentimes on major infrastructure projects, there's a lot of community-based commitments and political dynamics involved. And so your point is spot on that, once the money is in place, they want to get these projects awarded and get started, because people have been hearing about it for years and years and years. And so they want shovels in the ground. And so I agree with you totally that I think that oftentimes prematurely got work started because it's difficult to say, no, we're starting, but it's going to be 2 years before a shovel goes in the ground. Well, somebody was running for local office that promised that the shovel was going to be in the ground, in a year, right? And
right.
It's a reality in our business.
Right. Yeah, and if we could have, I was just working on a customer story with MasTec. They were able to accelerate record research by 7 months for their project. So having a solution like 4M to give you that speed to data kind of takes some of that, or maybe traditionally you just had to get things done. You had to move forward for whatever reason. Politically, you've already made assurances that certain things would get done at certain dates. Maybe you couldn't do some of that diligence in the beginning, but now there's a solution to do that. Where kind of going back to the prior point is it's just about educating, driving awareness that, hey, like there's actually a better solution to accelerate infrastructure projects like there wasn't before.
Agreed.
What do you think, Len, is, because we talked about how the industry has been a laggard in certain areas in terms of like the productivity curve. Maybe it hasn't adopted certain technologies that other industries have as quickly. Not to say that there hasn't been an evolution in the industry. That obviously there absolutely have been innovations in the industry. But what do you think is the main reason why the industry hasn't adapted certain technologies as quick? Are people skeptical of like AI, do you think? Is it like, how do we blend technological advancements and innovations into a traditional industry? I'd love your insight on that, because I know for myself, sometimes I look back and I'm like, how did I do something before this existed, like Google Maps on my phone?
Well, I've given this some thought, and I think it's really about having some, I call them pilot projects, if you will, with key clients that are well respected in the industry, that will we're a copycat industry like a lot of industries, right? And it's highly competitive. So I think once both engineers, contractors, and owners have successful projects where they can see how 4M's technology really does what they say it can do, and then they see and can equate that to metrics of dollars and time, and it'll spread, right? Mm-hmm. And I've already seen it in just the time I've been working with 4M, because it's still very competitive. That's the nature of our, procurement processes in the United States, that, if one major contractor and engineer has success with this, and people realize, wow, this tool is out there, that it works, and people will say, well, I've got to have that, right?
Right.
I've got to have that myself. And same goes with major infrastructure programs, right? So once it's adopted on major programs with, again, whether it's a DOT or some major infrastructure owner, and you can see, you've got the statistics at the end says, well, hey, the way we traditionally used to do it, here's how many days of delay, and here's the dollars that it ended up cost us. We used this technology and we reduced our delays by, X% and X millions of dollars. I think that's a big part of it in our industry, and and I think it's very user friendly, so that's not an issue. It's really about people using it on a major program, that then has visibility to other leaders in the industry, that and so I think that's going to be a key to it being adopted, right?
What would be advice you would give other industry leaders who are hesitant to adopting new technologies, say like utility AI? What would you tell them?
What I tell some of my current clients now is, the most innovative companies are where the best talent wants to go work.
Ooh, I like that.
So the way you're going to attract and retain the best talent is to be recognized as a company that has an innovative culture and doesn't just talk about it, but actually does it. There are some companies that profess that they're innovative, and then there's others that are actually innovative and implement innovation into how they do business. And I think, Chris, it goes beyond attracting and retaining top talent, which in the construction business, we are a people business. It's a people business. And so you're only as good as the people that you have. But I also think the best and most progressive owners want to work with engineers and contractors that are innovative. So, and I've seen this in recent years, that in these best value selections, that is an element of the scoring evaluation, is, demonstrate to us, the owner, that you utilize innovation and you implement it in your approach to, one, how you run your business, and two, how you would execute a project for us. So I think, to me, that's if you are not adapting and utilizing innovation and technology, you're just going to get left behind at some point, both in talent and in the ability to work for the best customers.
And would you say that seems like more of like a infinite mindset than a finite mindset? How can we make sure that we're competitive over the long run? We're investing now in our future. I feel like a lot of companies can make shortcuts and do short-term thinking, and like there's investments now that, to your point, like it looks like owners are looking for companies that are embracing new technologies, being innovative, always continuing to push the needle and not just relying on the status quo. Because, I mean, look at our infrastructure. Like, there's so much demand for infrastructure, we can't keep doing what we've been doing in order to build the future of America. We have some really ambitious goals, and honestly, not enough skilled labor to even do it. So, like, how can we continue to push the needle and keep driving change? So that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I was going to throw another question at you.
Yeah.
Interesting question. Love to hear your thoughts. Imagine, Len, a future where all the current challenges regarding utilities during infrastructure development are removed. I know it seems like a fantasy, right? What does the future look like for America's infrastructure if that were the case? If we could just remove all of the challenges that currently utilities have on infrastructure projects?
I think that kind of comes full circle to some earlier comments that we talked about. Is ultimately it's going to reduce the time for delivery of a project from inception to completion, right? Which time is money. So that's one. And I also believe, and we hadn't really touched on this, but I think the other huge opportunity for 4M is in the risk management side of our business. And, there's a huge element on the insurance end where owners and contractors and subcontractors all pay lots and lots of money in premiums to insure against this risk, right? And if in your utopia, if that risk goes away, there's billions of dollars spent where people are, one, insuring against that risk, but also adding, as I mentioned earlier, adding contingencies to deal with that risk, and fees. Our business is all about risk reward. So if in your risk assessment as an owner or a contractor or an engineer, you're adding money to deal with that risk. If that risk has gone away, or in your utopia, there's just more, as we said earlier, there's a finite amount of funds. Now that's going to create all those funds that were spent, adding contingencies, paying for insurance premiums, and losses obviously come full circle into increased premiums on future jobs. All those levels of funds that are spent that don't put a mile of, light rail in place is now going to be allocated toward putting whatever the infrastructure is, more of that infrastructure in place, right? And we're talking just in the US alone, I think over a period of time, you're talking about billions of dollars. It's not insignificant.
Right. I know it's a utopian, but even if we can get 1% better every day, every year, whatever that time, like just to narrow that gap. I mean, that's the goal, right? Like that utopian ideal.
Totally.
But any progress is good progress in my book. Len, last question for you. Really interested in, if you had in one sentence or one word, how would you describe 4M's utility AI mapping and an analytics solution? If you were to talk to an industry colleague, partner, and they asked you, what's this 4M analytics? Like, what do they got going on? And you were in an elevator. This is like the elevator pitch. In one word, how would you describe 4M's value to them?
Revolutionary.
Revolutionary. And why is that? Can you dig in there a little bit?
If you look up revolutionary on the internet, it's defined as can cause dramatic positive change in a circumstance or situation. So, I think that 4M's platform can be revolutionary because I think if it's used to its fullest extent, it can minimize, let's not go to your utopia situation, but it can certainly greatly minimize delays in projects and the damage that comes from when people hit buried utilities that aren't where they're shown to be, or they didn't even know existed, right? Based on current, ways we as-built projects. So I think it can be revolutionary. And as I said, I wasn't trying to be, trite, but earlier, my consulting business, as I mentioned, one of the things I do is I help, I call myself a dispute resolution strategist and advisor. And I'm not exaggerating. Every single dispute I'm involved in right now has delays associated with buried utilities. Every one. Now, they're not the only delay, but they exist in every single one that I'm involved with. It's a common thread, and sometimes it's not as significant, obviously, in others, but once people get into a dispute, and the disputes are in the millions, it's one of the first ones, right? I'm involved in one right now that I'm looking at the chronology of the delays, and the first delay they hit, they mobilized and they hit, buried utilities that nobody knew were there, and instantly caused delay, cost additional dollars. Then it starts creating distrust amongst the parties, early in a project. So we didn't even talk about that, but that's another, cause and effect that ends up happening, right?
Distrust in a project that it could be running years, and now you got this distrust at the very early stages.
Exactly.
That's a bummer.
Correct. Yeah, and it manifests itself in in other ways.
Well, thank you, Len. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I don't know if anybody noticed that's watching right now, but Len's teddy bear back there has a 4M hat on. I might have to zoom in on that. I got to get one of those.
Chicago Bear, by the way, Chris.
So yeah, not a Boston Red Sox hat.
Yes, that's a 4M hat, but it's a Chicago Bear, and that we got that bear because we lived in Chicago the last time they won a Super Bowl, which was 86.
Wow, almost my birthday. 87 was my birthday.
There you go.
Well, thank you, Len. We're going to have to do a part 2. Really appreciate you. I enjoyed this conversation. I know everybody's going to find this just as valuable as I did. So thanks again, Len.
Have a good one, Chris.